Okay, so. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to do something like this. Like, ever. I'm Sarah, 28, from Chicago, and I've always been the good girl. You know, the one who follows the rules, doesn't rock the boat, and definitely doesn't cheat on her boyfriend. But here's the thing, life doesn't always go the way you plan. And sometimes, you find yourself in situations you never thought you'd be in. This is one of those stories. It all started with Jake. Jake is my boyfriend of 3 years. He's a great guy, stable, reliable, and, well, predictable. He's the kind of guy who plans everything, from our weekend brunches to our vacations 6 months in advance. And don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. But after a while, it started to feel like I was living in a loop. Same routine, same conversations, same everything. I guess you could say I was bored. But I loved him, so I pushed those feelings aside. Until he came along. His name is Tyler. Tyler is different. He's the kind of guy who doesn't play by the rules. He's got this reckless energy about him, like he's always one step away from trouble but doesn't care. We met at a work event. He's a freelance photographer, and I'm in marketing. He was there to shoot the event, and I was there to schmooze clients. But the second we locked eyes, something shifted. He had this smirk, like he knew something I didn't, and it drove me crazy. We started talking, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced with Jake. Tyler was unpredictable, funny, and a little dangerous. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. And yeah, I know how cliché that sounds, but it's true. We exchanged numbers, and at first, it was innocent. Just texting here and there, harmless flirting. But then it escalated. Fast. One night, Jake was out of town for a work trip, and Tyler texted me. "Let's grab a drink," he said. I hesitated. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. I said yes. We met at this dive bar on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place where no one would recognize us. Tyler was already there when I arrived, leaning against the bar with a beer in his hand. He looked incredible. Like he'd just stepped out of some indie movie. We started talking, and before I knew it, we were laughing, flirting, and drinking way too much. Then he said it. "Let's get out of here." My heart raced. I knew what he meant. I knew what I was risking. But I didn't care. I followed him to his car, a beat-up Jeep with a back seat that felt way too small for what was about to happen. And that's where it all began. In the back seat of his car, with the city lights flickering through the windows, I crossed a line I never thought I'd cross. I cheated on Jake. And the worst part? I didn't feel guilty. Not in that moment. I felt alive. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, alone. The sunlight streaming through the blinds felt like an accusation. My head was pounding, not just from the alcohol but from the weight of what I'd done. I reached for my phone, half expecting a dozen missed calls or texts from Jake, but there was nothing. Just a single message from Tyler: "Last night was fun. Let's do it again sometime." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. Fun. That's what he called it. For him, it was just another night, another conquest. But for me? It was a line crossed, a secret I'd have to carry. I deleted the message and threw my phone across the bed, like that could somehow erase what happened. Jake came home that afternoon, all smiles and hugs, completely oblivious. He brought me a souvenir from his trip, a cheesy snow globe from the airport. "Saw this and thought of you," he said, handing it to me with that goofy grin I used to love. I forced a smile and thanked him, but inside, I felt like the worst person alive. How could he be so sweet, so trusting, when I just betrayed him in the worst way possible? The guilt hit me in waves over the next few days. Every time Jake kissed me, every time he told me he loved me, I felt like a fraud. I kept replaying that night in my head, trying to figure out how I'd let it happen. Was it because I was bored? Because Tyler was exciting and Jake was safe? Or was it something deeper, something broken inside me? I told myself it was a one-time thing, a mistake I'd never repeat. But then Tyler texted again. "Miss you," he wrote. Just 2 words, but they sent a jolt through me. I told myself to ignore him, to block his number and pretend he didn't exist. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself texting him back, telling him I missed him too. We started meeting up in secret. Sometimes it was just for coffee, other times for drinks. But it always ended the same way, in the back seat of his car, with me lying to Jake about where I was. I told myself I could stop anytime, that I was in control. But the truth was, I wasn't. I was addicted to the thrill, to the way Tyler made me feel. And the more I saw him, the harder it was to pretend everything was fine with Jake. One night, after another work event, aka another night with Tyler, I came home to find Jake waiting for me. He was sitting on the couch, his face pale, his hands shaking. My heart dropped. He knew. He had to know. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "We need to talk." I froze in the doorway, my heart pounding so loud I was sure Jake could hear it. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying, and his hands were clenched into fists on his knees. The TV was off, the room silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. It felt like the calm before a storm. "Jake," I started, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for something on the coffee table, a piece of paper. My stomach dropped as he handed it to me. It was a receipt. From the bar where Tyler and I had met that first night. The one I'd told Jake was a work dinner. "I found this in your coat pocket," he said, his voice low and strained. "Care to explain?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain this? How could I possibly justify what I'd done? I felt like I was drowning, the weight of my lies pulling me under. "It's not what you think," I finally managed to say, even though it was exactly what he thought. "Really?" Jake snapped, his voice rising. "Because it looks like you've been lying to me, Sarah. 4 weeks. Months, maybe. Who is he? Some guy from work? Someone you met online? Just tell me the truth." I flinched at the anger in his voice. I'd never seen Jake like this before. He was always so calm, so steady. But now? He looked like a stranger. "His name is Tyler," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's a photographer. We met at an event, and things just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Jake. I swear." Jake stared at me, his face a mix of hurt and disbelief. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? What does that even mean, Sarah? Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I wouldn't care?" "Of course I knew you'd care." I shot back, tears streaming down my face. But I couldn't stop, Jake. I don't know why. I felt something with him that I haven't felt with you in a long time. As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Jake looked like I'd slapped him. He stood up, pacing the room like he didn't know what to do with himself. "So that's it," he said, his voice breaking. 3 years together, and you throw it all away for some guy who makes you feel something? What about us, Sarah? What about everything we've built? I didn't have an answer. All I could do was cry as the weight of what I'd done crashed down on me. Jake stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes filled with a sadness that cut deeper than any anger ever could. "I think you should leave," he said quietly. "I can't do this right now. I can't even look at you." I wanted to argue, to beg for another chance, but I knew I didn't deserve it. So I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, leaving behind the life I'd destroyed. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go back to Jake's, our, apartment, and I couldn't face Tyler. Not yet. So I ended up at my best friend Emily's place. She opened the door, took one look at my tear-streaked face, and pulled me into a hug without asking any questions. That's the kind of friend she is. Once I was settled on her couch with a cup of tea, I told her everything. The texts, the lies, the nights in Tyler's car. She listened quietly, her expression shifting from shock to sympathy to something I couldn't quite place, disappointment, maybe. "Sarah," she said when I finally finished, "what were you thinking?" "I don't know," I admitted, staring into my tea. "I wasn't thinking. That's the problem. I got caught up in it. Tyler made me feel alive, Emily. Like I wasn't just going through the motions anymore." Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I get it. I do. But that doesn't make it okay. Jake didn't deserve this. You know that, right?" I nodded, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. "I know. I messed up. I messed up so bad." Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do now?" That was the million-dollar question. What was I going to do? I couldn't go back to Jake, not after what I'd done. And Tyler? He was fun, exciting, but he wasn't the kind of guy you built a life with. He was a distraction, a mistake I'd made to fill some void I didn't even understand. "I don't know," I said again, feeling more lost than ever. "I think I need to figure out who I am without Jake. Without Tyler. Without all of this." Emily nodded. "Maybe that's not such a bad idea. Take some time for yourself. Figure out what you really want." I stayed with Emily for a few days, trying to sort through the mess I'd made. Jake didn't call or text, and I didn't blame him. I'd broken his trust, shattered the life we'd built together. There was no coming back from that. Tyler, on the other hand, kept texting. "Hey, where've you been? Miss you. Let's hang out." I ignored him at first, but eventually, I caved and replied. We met up at a park, and for the first time, I really looked at him. Not as the exciting, dangerous guy who'd swept me off my feet, but as the person he was, flawed, selfish, and just as lost as I was. "This isn't working," I told him, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "I can't keep doing this. I need to figure out my life, and you're not part of that." Tyler looked surprised, maybe even a little hurt, but he didn't argue. "Okay," he said with a shrug. "If that's what you want." And just like that, it was over. No drama, no big goodbye. Just two people walking away from something that was never meant to last. After ending things with Tyler, I decided to take Emily's advice and focus on myself. I moved into a small apartment downtown, started seeing a therapist, and even picked up yoga, something I'd always mocked but now found oddly calming. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making progress. Then, out of nowhere, Jake reached out. It was a text, simple and to the point. "Can we talk?" My heart raced as I stared at my phone. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face him. But I owed him this much. So I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near his place. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He looked different. Tired, but also calmer, like he'd come to terms with something. I sat down across from him, my hands trembling as I wrapped them around the warm cup. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Hey," I replied, unsure of what else to say. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, Jake spoke. "I've had a lot of time to think," he said, staring into his coffee. "And I realized something. I wasn't perfect either, Sarah. I got so caught up in work and routines that I stopped trying. I stopped making you feel special. And I'm sorry for that." I blinked, surprised. This wasn't the conversation I'd been expecting. "Jake, you don't have to apologize. What I did, it was my fault. Not yours." He shook his head. "It's not that simple. Relationships are a two-way street. I should have seen that you were unhappy. I should have done something before it got to this point." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him he was wrong, that none of this was his fault. But another part of me wondered if he was right. Had I been so focused on blaming myself that I hadn't considered how Jake's actions, or lack thereof, had contributed to everything? Before I could respond, Jake dropped a bombshell. "There's something else I need to tell you," he said, his voice hesitant. I've been seeing someone." My heart stopped. "What?" He looked up at me, his expression a mix of guilt and relief. "Her name's Claire. We met at work. It's not serious or anything, but I thought you should know." I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Jake? Seeing someone else? It shouldn't have surprised me. After all, I'd cheated on him, but it did. I guess part of me had assumed he'd just wait for me to figure myself out, like he always did. But he hadn't. He'd moved on. "Oh," was all I could manage to say. Jake reached across the table, his hand hovering over mine like he wasn't sure if he should touch me. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Sarah. I think we both need to be honest with each other if we're ever going to move forward." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I get it. And I'm happy for you, Jake. Really." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks. I just want you to know that I don't hate you. I'm still angry, and I'm still hurt, but I don't hate you." That was something, at least. We talked for a little while longer, mostly about mundane things, work, the weather, how Emily was doing. It was awkward, but it was also nice. Like we were finally starting to heal. But as I left the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Jake's revelation had thrown me for a loop, and I wasn't sure how to process it. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Hey Sarah. It's Claire. We need to talk." I stared at the text, my mind racing. Claire? Jake's Claire? Why was she texting me? My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I replied, "Okay. When and where?" She suggested a quiet cafe on the other side of town, and I agreed. The whole way there, my stomach was in knots. What could she possibly want to talk about? Was she going to confront me about Jake? Warn me to stay away? I had no idea, but I wasn't prepared for what she actually said. When I walked into the cafe, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting at a table by the window, her blonde hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She looked polished. Like someone who had her life together in a way I never would. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Claire?" I asked, even though I already knew it was her. She looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah. Thanks for coming." I sat down, my hands gripping the edge of the table. So, what's this about? Claire hesitated, stirring her coffee like she was trying to find the right words. I know this is awkward, she said finally. But there's something you need to know. About Jake. My heart skipped a beat. What about him? She took a deep breath. Jake and I, we're not just coworkers. And we didn't just start seeing each other after you two broke up. I frowned, confused. What are you saying? Claire looked me straight in the eye. We've been seeing each other for over a year, Sarah. The world seemed to tilt. What? That's not possible. Jake wouldn't. He did, she interrupted, her voice firm. I know it's hard to hear, but it's the truth. Jake's been cheating on you for a long time. With me. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Jake? Cheating on me? It didn't make sense. Jake was the stable one, the reliable one. He wasn't the type to cheat. Was he? Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice shaking. Claire sighed, looking down at her coffee. Because I think you deserve to know the truth. And because I'm done being his secret. I thought he was going to leave you for me, but he didn't. He just kept stringing me along. And then, when you two broke up, I thought maybe things would change. But they didn't. He's still the same guy, Sarah. He's not who you think he is. I didn't know what to say. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything she'd just told me. Jake had been cheating on me? For over a year? It didn't seem possible, but the look on Claire's face told me she wasn't lying. I'm sorry, she said softly. I know this is a lot to take in. But I thought you should know. I nodded numbly, my thoughts a jumbled mess. Thanks. I guess. Claire stood up, tossing a few bills on the table to cover her coffee. Take care of yourself, Sarah. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. I didn't sleep that night. Claire's words played on a loop in my mind, each repetition twisting the knife a little deeper. Jake, my Jake, had been cheating on me. For over a year. The man I'd thought was the epitome of loyalty and stability had been living a double life. And I'd been too blind, too trusting, to see it. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to hear it from him. I needed to look him in the eye and see if he'd lie to me again. So I texted him, we need to talk. Now. He agreed to meet me at our old spot, the park where we'd had our first date. It felt poetic, in a way. The place where it all began would be where it all ended. When I got there, Jake was already waiting on a bench, his hands clasped tightly together. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. Hey, he said, his voice cautious. Hey, I replied, sitting down beside him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, loaded with everything we hadn't said. Finally, I broke it. Claire told me everything. Jake froze, his face going pale. Sarah, Don't, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't try to explain. Just tell me the truth. Did you cheat on me? With her? He hesitated, then nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Yes. I did. Hearing him say it out loud was like a punch to the chest. All this time, I'd been carrying the guilt of my own betrayal, thinking I was the one who destroyed us. But Jake had been lying to me long before I ever met Tyler. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why would you do that, Jake? I thought we were happy. He shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. We were. At least, I thought we were. But I got complacent. Bored. And when Claire started paying attention to me, it felt good. Like I was wanted again. I know it's not an excuse, but that's the truth. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the man I thought I'd known. You let me blame myself, I said quietly. You let me think I was the one who ruined everything. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything we'd lost hanging between us. Finally, I stood up, brushing the dirt off my jeans. I can't forgive you, I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. Not right now, maybe not ever. But I'm done carrying this guilt. What happened between us, it wasn't just my fault. And I'm not going to let it define me anymore. Jake looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and relief. I understand. And for what it's worth. I hope you find someone who deserves you. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. You too, Jake. Take care of yourself. And with that, I walked away. For the first time in months, I felt free. Free from the guilt, the lies, the weight of a relationship that had been broken long before I'd realized it. Epilogue. It's been 6 months since that day in the park. I've spent a lot of time reflecting, healing, and figuring out who I am without Jake or Tyler. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. I've reconnected with old friends, taken up new hobbies, and even started dating again, slowly, cautiously. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, and that's okay. I'm stronger now. Wiser. And for the first time in a long time, I'm hopeful about the future. As for Jake, I heard through the grapevine that he and Claire didn't work out. I don't know if that's true, and honestly, I don't care. He's a part of my past, not my future. Life is messy. People make mistakes. But sometimes, those mistakes lead us to where we're meant to be. And for me, that's a place where I can finally say I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm happy.